You know, we all love a good underdog story, but I bet you haven't heard one quite like the Chaco War. Between 1932 and 1935, two South American nations fought one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century. And here's the puzzle. How in the world did the smaller, poorer nation of Paraguay manage to defeat a larger, wealthier, and way better equipped Bolivia?
So, how does that happen? That's the big question we're going to tackle in this explainer. It's an incredible story about brutal terrain, clever tactics, and two military commanders with totally different ideas clashing in one of the most hostile places on Earth.
I mean, just look at these numbers. On paper, this should have been a blowout. Bolivia had nearly 3 times the people and put 100,000 more troops in the field. This really should have been a quick, decisive win for them. But as we're about to find out, wars aren't won on paper.
Okay, so to really get this war, you have to picture the battlefield. And the Gran Chaco is, well, it's not a place you'd ever want to visit. It's this huge, semi-desert wilderness of thorny bushes and just suffocating heat. As this Bolivian veteran put it so perfectly, the land itself was the enemy, a place where you'd die of thirst, disease, or just getting lost.
Yeah, no kidding. This was an impossible war. Fought over this desolate, unforgiving land, it ended up costing nearly 100,000 lives. And for so many of those soldiers, the biggest threat wasn't a bullet from the other side. It was the heat, the thirst, and the disease. But really, at the heart of this whole conflict, you've got this amazing duel between two generals. Their backgrounds, their training, their entire way of thinking about war, they couldn't have been more different. And this clash of ideas would end up deciding everything. So, on one side, you have Bolivia's General Hans Kunt. He's a German veteran of World War I, totally old school. He believed in just throwing massive, direct assaults at the enemy, thinking his superior numbers and firepower would just crush them. But his rigid, European tactics were completely wrong for the Chaco, and worse, he totally underestimated his opponent. On the other side, there's Paraguay's General José Félix Estigarribia. French-trained, he was all about modern ideas of movement and understood a crucial truth. In the Chaco, supplies, speed, and knowing the land were worth way more than just brute force. So how did Estigarribia turn that knowledge into a win? Well, he used a concept that was pretty revolutionary for the time, something that gave his smaller army a huge intellectual advantage. Paraguay's secret weapon wasn't a new tank or a plane. It was an idea. And that idea is called operational art. Okay, what does that mean? Well, think of it like this. Tactics are about winning one battle. Strategy is your overall goal to win the war. Operational art is the genius in the middle. It's about connecting all your small battlefield moves into one single, elegant campaign that leads to checkmate. While Kunt was busy trying to win individual fights, Estigarribia was playing a whole different, much smarter game. And this quote from Estigarribia himself is just a total game changer. For him, the target wasn't some piece of dirt or a fort. The real prize, the center of gravity, was the Bolivian army itself. He knew that if he could destroy their ability to fight, taking the territory would be easy. He was aiming to annihilate the army, not just capture dusty outposts. And he did this with a brilliant, brutal tactic called the corralito, or the little corral. So instead of those clumsy frontal attacks, his soldiers would just melt into the dense brush, sneak around the Bolivian defenses, and pop up deep behind their lines. Then, they'd cut the supply lines, especially for water, which was like gold in the Chaco. And only then, once the Bolivian soldiers were trapped, thirsty, and losing hope, well, they closed the trap and encircled. And all of this came to a head in the most devastating way possible in December of 1933. At a place called Campo Vía, Estigarribia's corralito wasn't just going to win a battle, it was going to break the back of the entire Bolivian war effort. This was the checkmate.
So picture this. Over several weeks, Estigarribia's forces pull off a massive corralito. They slip past the Bolivian defenses, cut them off from behind, and then just slowly, patiently tighten the noose. 2 whole Bolivian divisions, we're talking thousands of men, suddenly realize they are completely trapped in the baking heat of the Chaco with zero hope of getting supplies or reinforcements.
The final result? An absolute catastrophe for Bolivia. 7,500 of their soldiers were forced to surrender. This wasn't just a loss, it was a total humiliation that exposed how flawed Bolivia's command was. General Kunt's arrogance had led his men straight into a perfect trap, and he was fired almost immediately. For Paraguay, it was a massive victory, netting them thousands of prisoners and a huge amount of weapons they desperately needed. So, the war finally ends in 1935. Paraguay wins, securing about 75% of the land they were fighting for. Estigarribia, of course, returns home as a national hero, the guy who pulled off an impossible victory. And when you're that popular, well, politics is usually the next step.
But man, his time in power was a total whirlwind, and tragically short. He gets elected president in 1939, but right away he's facing huge political problems. In less than a year, he suspends the Constitution and just takes on dictatorial powers. And then, just 7 months after that, his story comes to a sudden, shocking end.
And that brings us to the really complicated part of his legacy. It turns out the very skills that made Estigarribia such a brilliant, adaptable general just didn't work in the messy, chaotic world of peacetime politics. His story is really one of two completely different men.
You see, as president, Estigarribia was completely out of his element. The country he was leading was exhausted, broke, and totally divided. He was dealing with strikes, student protests, and nonstop political fighting. His solution? To act like a commander, not a politician. In February 1940, he basically just called a truce, dissolved Congress, and started ruling by himself. He pushed through a new, very authoritarian constitution that gave all the power to the presidency, arguing it was the only way to bring order to all the chaos.
But we'll never know how that political experiment would have played out. On September 7, 1940, less than a month after his new constitution went into effect, the plane carrying Estigarribia and his wife crashed. They were both killed. The nation he had saved on the battlefield mourned its hero, promoting him after his death to the highest possible rank, Marshal.
So, we're left with this question. How do we remember José Félix Estigarribia? Was he a military genius who saved his country from a superior enemy through pure brilliance? Or was he a flawed political leader who was heading down a dangerous path to dictatorship? You know, the truest answer is probably that he was both, a complex, brilliant, and formidable figure, forged in the fires of one of history's most brutal wars.